All right. Hi, everyone. Can everyone see and hear me okay? Very good. Okay. So today we're taking a look at chapter one in Kim. We'll also, along the way, briefly consider some of the insights that might be gleaned from Terry Bisson's short story, They're Made Out of Meat. While I get the screen share going, who had a chance to take a look at those optional but recommended readings, by the way? Or alternatively, there is a short film adaptation that I made available. Very good. Okay, good. So, um, it's very short, right? If you haven't read it or watched the short film, um, please do. I think it's very helpful for illuminating some of the things that Kim discusses in this first chapter, where he sort of surveys the the field of philosophy of mind, which is what we're learning about in this course. It is a bit of a trip. Um, yeah, it's an interesting little independent adaptation. So it's pretty weird, pretty quirky. Um, uh, but if you're more of a watcher and less of a reader, the short film is very good. So we'll just keep some of the things in that film in mind as we make our way through the reading. Um, right. So we want to get familiar with some important terms and important concepts that Kim introduces in chapter one, which is just simply entitled Introduction. I think we can think of it as an introduction, not just to the book, but to the area of philosophy of mind in general. And one of the things Kim's begins by saying is that we tend to categorize things. That's the kind of beings that we are. We categorize things in the world into, well, all kinds of different categories. And two of the most important categories, for I think quite obvious reasons, are things that are alive and things that are not alive, because it matters, um, in terms of how we deal with what's out there in the world, whether what we're dealing with is animate or inanimate. So that's a basic categorical distinction we draw. We also categorize, when it comes to the animate things, categorize them further into things with minds and things which do not have minds. So we categorize, you know, inanimate things together like rocks. Um, what else? Tables. Various artifacts, as well as naturally occurring phenomena, could be considered inanimate if they are not alive. Animate things include plants, animals, and so forth, bacteria, fungi, etc. But not all of the things that are alive have minds. Arguably, you know, well, obviously, we have minds. Arguably, many other non-human animals have minds. They're capable of things like not just thinking, but perceiving the world and acting within the world. Um, I mean, plants are certainly animate, but they're not generally regarded to have minds. And yeah, we kind of give ourselves a special spot, a special place in this sort of worldview, right? Kim writes that we're apt to regard ourselves as occupying a special and distinctive place in the natural world on account of our particularly highly developed mental capacities and functions, such as the capacity for abstract thought, self-consciousness, artistic abilities, complex emotions, and a capacity for rational deliberation and action. Um, but of course, there are other living creatures with minds, not just us. I think probably um, if you were to ask somebody like Rene Descartes, who we're looking at next time, he would largely deny that non-human animals have minds. Thinking, reason, mentality, all these sort of higher capacities we have, like imagination, abstraction, judgment, etc., are really due to the rational soul, um, which animals lack. Animals, for Descartes, are beast machines. They're like, um, if you want, you can think of them almost as robots that lack souls and operate, I think, as he says in the discourses on the method, purely from the disposition of their organs. Um, Probably very few people would countenance a view like that today, right? I mean, we largely agree that many other non-human animals have minds. Arguably other apes, right? So if we're talking the great apes, we're talking not only human beings, but common chimpanzees and bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans. Clearly, clearly mental beings, right? They don't just perceive the world and act within the world, but they demonstrate problem solving abilities, tool use, other things that used to be associated exclusively with human beings. Other examples might include creatures like elephants. Elephants are quite intelligent. Cetaceans, so we're talking dolphins and whales. Oh, I've got elephants twice there. I'll have to fix that. And of course, domestic animals, right? Here on the slides, dogs and cats would be the most obvious example. I mean, dogs are highly intelligent social beings. Cats are much less social. You know, if you have a cat, you know this. And they don't seem to understand intentional behaviors the same way dogs do. Nonetheless, cats are quite clever. Any other examples? What are we missing? Non-human animals, which are clearly intelligent, which we might say have minds. Yeah, the octopus, very good. Octopus are very smart considering they're invertebrates, but they're considered to be quite intelligent. They've exhibited problem-solving abilities in, I think, both laboratory settings and in the wild. Some birds, certainly, particularly corvids and parrots. So corvids, yep, like Samuel says here, corvids. Crows are a type of corvid, yep. So it's predominant, not like not to say that they're the only smart birds, but corvids like ravens, New Caledonian crows. New Caledonian crows have been documented using tools in the wild. Um, Ravens are quite intelligent. And parrots, of course, you know, you've got like Alex the African gray parrot who was very intelligent. Yeah, rats are quite intelligent. Rats, well, experiments with rats running mazes were partially responsible for the downfall of behaviorism, which we'll talk about next week. But yeah, it turns out rats are quite sophisticated and can maintain these sort of cognitive maps or mental maps of their environment, something that the behaviorist psychologists of the early 20th century couldn't really explain on behaviorism. So, what else do we have here? Yeah, horses, absolutely. Um, oh, interesting. Yeah, the way that research on octopus is regulated ethically. Yeah, dolphins. Well, dolphins are cetaceans. Very intelligent. So we agree that there are non-human animals with minds. Um, some things are a little bit more difficult to assess, right? Kim says that generally, for example, plants, which are alive, are generally not regarded as thinking things. Um, I don't know. What do we think? Lee?
Well, I think there might be like the boundaries might be a bit blurry, you know, because they've discovered a lot of things about like mushrooms, for example, and like certain trees, like um the trees are all aware of each other, for example, like and they can kind of communicate through their roots and stuff. So there's some kind of thinking going on there possibly, but it's hard for us to understand because it's so different from the way a rat thinks or the way that we think. But there's it's not completely like it's not like an automata or whatever, right? So
Hmm. That's
interesting.
right. The interesting thing is, well, trees sort of seem to exhibit this symbiosis with mycelial networks, which are, the main thing when we're talking about fungi, which are not plants. I think it's important to note. Um, Nonetheless, yeah, these mycelial networks are really the living, the actual entity. The mushrooms and stuff that we see maybe on the forest floor are merely the fruiting bodies, but these mycelia form networks with trees and exchange nutrients with the trees in a sort of symbiotic fashion. You could argue that there is some kind of information processing happening there, and if we define thinking or cognition as information processing, then yeah, maybe you can make an argument that plants do think in a sense. Um, for example, right, down here on this point, sunflowers exhibit something called heliotropism. So they're able to follow the sun as it moves across the sky. And you can see this if you watch time-lapse videos of sunflowers or other plants. Um, Other flowering plants will often open and close, right? Open in the daytime and close at night. If you have a lawn with dandelions on it, for example, you'll see this. Do the plants know when it's sunny versus when it's nighttime, right? There's got to be some sort of information processing going on there. But is it cognition? Or probably my favorite example would be the Venus flytrap, right? The Venus flytrap contains little hairs inside of the flower, right? The part that snaps shut on the insect is actually the flower. And in there are these little hairs that are connected to these sort of chemical timers. Um, Now, opening and closing your flower, if you're a Venus flytrap, takes a lot of energy. So before a Venus flytrap closes on a prey item, it actually needs two taps on its hairs within 20 seconds of one another. Otherwise, it won't close. That's pretty sophisticated for a plant. So maybe you can make an argument that plants think. Samuel?
Hi, sorry, am I coming through all right?
Yep.
So I would make the argument that about the whole sunflower, focusing on the sunflower thing, I would argue that they're not quite thinking about it because they take the stimuli and then they immediately react. They don't process it and say like you shine a light in a mouse's eyes and then it thinks, what should I do about this? For a second. It just takes the stimuli and then immediately reacts to it. So I wouldn't argue that they think, or like they just base reaction, like takes impulse, uh, reacts to impulse. That'd just be
Um,
my argument.
Yeah, it sounds like what plants are missing on your view are mental representations, right?
Yes, I guess like interpretation, like there, even if it's like in like base animals, like a like a mouse, say, like I know they're clever, but if they have an impulse and they're quick to react. Like they have instinct, but they need to interpret how to act on that instinct.
Right. They can
Yeah,
reason.
they can reason even to a limited degree, but like a sunflower reacting to the sun, it's just it takes the impulse and then reacts to it. I don't know. I'm an engineer trying to talk philosophy. I'm not.
That's
I might
okay.
not be making sense.
I would say if I'm hearing what you're saying correctly, plants lack the sort of inner states that something like a mouse or a rat or indeed you or I have. Um, Now, and that is true, and that is perhaps a line of argument you could use to make a case against plant cognition.
Yeah,
Um,
that's pretty much what I'm trying to go for, I guess.
yeah, and plants perhaps are more like what we would call reflex agents, kind of like a thermostat, right? A thermostat is just a physical mechanisms that's set up in such a way that if the temperature rises or falls past a certain point, it turns on or off. Maybe the plant is more like that. That is cognitive, but in a very, very rudimentary sense, right? Um, yeah, like Holly saying, does the sunflower think of options, sun or no sun? No, it doesn't, right? Um, yeah, an automatic process. Now, that's not to say that thinking things do not have automatic cognitive and perceptual processes going on. We certainly do. But is that what it is to have a mind? Perhaps you need more than that, right? Hayden?
Uh, I was kind of wondering, like, looking at it from the just sort of perspective of, I guess, information processing and stuff, could I make an argument that plants might even sort of communicate with people? Because, like, I have a lot of house plants, and some of them will like droop and stuff if they need water, and I realize that's kind of them getting injured maybe, but also it does signal like to me that they need water, so I don't know. I was wondering if that could be considered some kind of cognition or something as well.
It's possible. I mean, plants have certainly evolved to signal, maybe not in the sense that they need water, like with your house plants, but think of a plant that has evolved to present colors that are attractive to pollinators, right? That might not be an individual plant thinking, but that's evolutionary pressure over a great amount of time, selecting for plants that can signal certain things to certain creatures. Would I call that thinking? I'm not sure, right? Um, so what about let's get away from plants for a bit. What about bacteria? I think we probably would agree that while bacteria are alive, they lack minds. And viruses are, well, maybe not even alive at all and also lack minds, right? Do we agree? Yeah. I think it's probably a little more clear cut when it comes to bacteria. Although it is interesting that the immune system, like the human immune system, is quite intelligent in a certain way. Is it uh is it aware of what it's doing? No. But I mean, the second most complicated thing in each of us, aside from our brain and central nervous system, is in fact our immune system. Um, there is something computational about the immune system. So, is the immune system thinking? Well, maybe in a sense it is, maybe in a sense it isn't, right? And I guess what all of this is supposed to illustrate is that sometimes it can be a little bit hard to tell how to delineate between thinking things and non-thinking things, right? Take bees. In sorry, Arya, in what way what isn't? Well, the immune system processes information, right? For example, right, if you are infected with some kind of germ that your body has previously identified and fought, it will start releasing antibodies. Those antibodies signal, like T cells and B cells to attack the intruder. They also kind of stick to the intruder, so the body knows what to go after. These changes also cause other changes in the body, like you might develop a fever, right? Um, it's computational in the sense that it's following almost like a program. almost like a computer program. But the immune system itself doesn't know what it's doing in the same sense that I know what I'm doing right now. There's no uh, mental representations, right? Yeah, it's like following a program, like a very complicated computer program. So, right, it's hard to tell. It can be hard to tell sometimes, right? Is a bee intelligent? Some of you might say yes, and some of you might say no. But we can also ask, is a beehive intelligent collectively? Is an ant, an individual ant, something that has a mind, or should we maybe more think of the colony as what is the mind, right? Ants are pretty simple life forms, but if you put a whole bunch of them together working in a colony, it's a kind of a complicated superorganism, isn't it? Much different than something like an earthworm, which maybe an earthworm is more like our sunflower, simply responding to stimuli. Um, well, there's a lot of different ways we can define intelligence. And I think most people understand intelligence in terms of adaptive problem solving. Um, and if you do it that way, right, if you understand intelligence that way, then there are intelligent creatures, but there are also intelligent systems, right? Like a human being and an ant colony or a beehive. Um, well, the queen bee, yeah, the queen ant or the queen bee is part of the system, an important part of the system. But sometimes intelligent behaviors emerge out of simpler parts, right? Like ants and bees and wasps. Um, so yeah, here's the way I think of it, Samuel. That's a good point. The way I think of it is that ants are maybe a little smart, each individual ant, but a big colony of ants is much smarter. Lee, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about like emerging complexity because like we've just established that bacteria and viruses are not alive, but like, for example, the gut microbiome. I mean, the human body, I can't remember what percentage it is, but it's like a huge, massive percentage of like the actual mass of the human body is bacteria and like little organisms and little creatures that live inside us, right?
Hmm.
And like the gut brain connection, like probably a lot of our thinking comes from whatever how those bacteria are doing, and like just the fact that they're digesting certain things in certain ways and all that stuff that could be construed as a kind of intelligence, even though maybe an individual bacterium isn't like technically very intelligent at all or
Yeah.
even possibly alive.
Yeah, I think that reminds me of an idea called embodiment, right? In philosophy of mind. And unfortunately, this is not really something that Kim discusses very much in this book, if at all. Um, but we're not just disembodied brains in vats, right? We are brains in bodies that are situated in a dynamic environment. Um, so what's going on in the body can certainly affect what's going on in the mind. And that could include what all of the little creatures that live in symbiosis with us are doing. Um, right? So it's a complicated question. Like, I'm even, you can even ask me, like, or ask this of yourself. What makes you a thinking being? Is it just that you have a brain? Well, that's obviously very important, but you also have a body, which you can use to sense the environment and interact with the environment. You have these hands that you can use to manipulate things in the world, to make tools, et cetera, right? And the world isn't just static, the world is changing all the time. Lee?
Yeah, and I'm gonna add to that that it's not just how your body interacts with the world, but also how it interacts with itself, right?
Mhm.
Like there's interoception and proprioception, which is like how you feel what is going inside of what is going on inside of your body, and like where your body is in space and all of that.
Yeah,
All of that is also super interconnected with what goes on in the brain.
that's right. People tend to talk about human beings as if we have a mere five senses, right? Smell, taste, sight, hearing, and touch. But we have other senses as well, like proprioception, interoception, etc. Um, so yeah, sometimes it's hard to tell where to draw the line. What about something that is not alive? Right? I've said like, okay, there are living things that maybe don't think, or if they don't think, they may form part of a thinking entity. But could something that's not alive think, like a robot or a computer? Samuel?
Okay, no, I might have some because I'm in computer systems engineering, so I might have some insight into this. I don't think so because at its very core, each computer or robot is written down on a set of pre-programmed signals. So it does not have it. Sure, it could have like a vast amount of said signals, but they're all still pre-programmed. It's still going back to a subroutine of some sort down the line. So
So
I
it's
would,
so it's determined by its programming, is what you're saying?
in essence, is what I'm trying to say here. I
Okay.
don't think it's capable of thinking entirely on its own. It's programmed. It's basically told how to think ahead of time.
Okay. I think I know what some of those hands going up are about to say, but let's find
Uh-oh.
out.
Did I?
But thank you. Thank you, Sam. Let's start with Push.
I mean, realistically, with like, let's just say AI and stuff, it doesn't actually have a conscious mind where it's like, yes, it's responding to your questions and stuff, but it's not actually responding with any thoughts and stuff. It's just like a set habit where it's like a subconscious habit where it just goes into searching through the program, whatever it's been programmed to do,
Yeah, I
and then
certainly
just
agree with
follows its
that.
habit.
Yeah, I would certainly agree that at least thus far, we have not produced any AI that is conscious in the sense that we are. Uh, conscious in the sense that there's something that it's like to be that AI. Does that mean that a computer could not think? No, that does not mean that. In fact, most people would agree that, or not most people, but perhaps a lot of cognitive scientists would say that if thinking is information processing, if that's what cognition is, then yes, computers can think. And not only that, we are a kind of computer as well, a natural computer, if you like. Um, so that's one argument. Um, yeah, just to say what Leo says, just to look at that briefly. Couldn't we make an AI that isn't pre-programmed? Yes, we do that. That's what neural networks are. That's what machine learning is all about. Which we'll take a look at. Well, maybe we'll swing back to this later in the lecture. Uh, yeah, I've read about this just recently, a case where one of OpenAI's projects tried to copy itself to a server. Um, the problem with this is whenever a news story like this breaks, a lot of it is sensationalized quite a bit. I don't really know enough about this most recent case of attempted self-copying. I don't know enough about it to make any sort of pronouncements about whether the thing is thinking or self-aware. Um, so Holly says, though I may be off the mark, but can the thing's interpretations have a physical effect? I know this is sort of getting ahead to Descartes, but I'm thinking about epigenetic stuff. I'm not really sure what you mean, Holly.
That's okay. I'm gonna use my voice. I've had too much coffee in my fingers today.
Okay.
Um, I'm thinking that, like, as I'm sitting here thinking, this is actually getting into Descartes and the next chapter, where
Mhm.
he says, the mental does affect the physical. Um, and I'm thinking rocks can't affect rocks. I don't think an ant can affect its body. Um, and just it's a little bit of a it's hard to really talk about what I'm thinking. Um, but our minds actually do affect us physically. A computer's mind, AI, LLM, whatever, can't affect itself physically. I'm thinking about twins. I'm thinking about epigenetics, like the fact that our interpretations, not just the environment, but our interpretations of the environment differ and actually affect our DNA or what's expressed in our DNA.
Mhm.
That to me is mind.
Yeah, that's possible, but you're going to see that Kim is actually skeptical about this possibility that the mental actually can affect the physical. Um,
I know, and when I was reading it, I agreed with him, but now I don't.
yeah. So we'll see. We'll explore this when later on in this lecture when we look at the three different supervenience theses that he outlined. So when we talk about mind-brain supervenience, and then later when we get into the chapter on mental causation, we're going to grapple with that worry about epiphenomenalism,
Okay.
right?
All
But
right.
yeah, it's possible. Hayden?
This is, I guess, kind of on the AI thing again, but I don't really think we can say for sure whether an AI thinks or not, just because I think there's an argument that we can't even say that about each other. It's like the whole philosophical zombie thing, and I don't know. I find that kind of believable just because of I have a neuro background, and like you could argue that everything that people do is just the result of neurons firing, and the way that those are wired kind of I think is almost evidence for some kind of like determinism with our thinking and our behavior, maybe, but I could be completely wrong.
Yeah. That's certainly how it seems. If you focus exclusively on what's going on in the brain. It seems like we might ourselves be um, like flesh robots, right? To bring it back to they're made out of meat. What does the thinking? Meat does the thinking, right? Um, Liam?
Can you hear me?
Hmm.
Okay. I have two things. One is in response to Holly. Computers do physically change. Transistors have electrons in them that get modified and moved around. So they do physically change in response to thinking and information processing. And you can also have computers make other computers, like automation and stuff like
Yeah,
that, and design other computers. So the
right.
argument of like them modifying themselves genetically for reproduction can also be replicated with computers. And then I first raised my hand in response to you kind of said most of it. It was more of a cognitive science perspective on the whole, like, can computers think? And the only thing that I really want to add on your stuff was that like they're both humans and computers are closed systems which have inputs and outputs, and information is processed within that. Therefore, they are both in that way, in that cognitive like definition or debate on what is thinking, they're both thinking.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes that's called the classical sandwich, right? Where you have inputs, some computation, and then outputs. Um, and yeah, you're right. Computers and biological thinking machines like us are both like that. I think what we mean when we say, computers, the minds of computers physically affecting the computers themselves, what we're actually asking is not whether the physical states change along with mental states, whether it's my brain states changing with my mental states changing, or whether it's what circuits are on or off in a computer, based on what program I'm running. It's not that. We want to know what's doing the causal work, right? Is does my thought, right, my non-physical mental state of desiring to have a sip of coffee, is that what causes the physical state changes, like my neurons firing in my motor cortex, etc., to reach out and pick up the coffee cup? Maybe, but the picture we have from looking at the brain um, kind of makes it look like mental states don't really have much of a causal role to play, at least not in terms of initiating action. In terms of letting things happen, sure, maybe, but we'll unpack this a bit more as we go. Okay, so Kim writes that surely simpler creatures have sensations, simple creatures, maybe even including bacteria, but certainly insects, earthworms, maybe even plants like the Venus flytrap. Um, for they react in appropriate ways to noxious stimuli, and they have sense organs through which they gain information about what goes on around them and adjust and modify their behavior accordingly. So this could include plants, this can include insects, as well as higher forms of life, dogs, cats, apes, people, etc. But do they have minds? Are they conscious? Do they have mentality? What is it to have a mind or mentality? So the questions we've been kind of toying with so far are the kinds of questions we ask in philosophy of mind, right? Where we ask fundamental questions about the mental. Questions like, do plants think? Is a beehive intelligent? Could a computer think? Well, to answer those questions, we need to ask more fundamental questions. Questions like, what is it to think? Just what is a mind anyway, right? And it's a set of problems like this, right? What is it to have a mind? What is it to have mentality? What is consciousness, etc.? These questions define the field of philosophy of mind, where we are asking fundamental questions about everything related to the mental. And one big question might be just what is the mental? What counts as mental? Another could be, what's the relationship between different mental properties and mental states? And how do those all work together? What are some mental properties or mental states? Can we try and come up with some now? You're probably all having a mental state at the moment. I hope you are. I hope there are no philosophical zombies here. Yeah, pain. The experience of pain is a mental state, and having emotions. Yeah, absolutely. Problem solving. Problem solving, I would describe as a mental process, right? Perhaps a series of states. Fight or flight? Maybe, maybe. Um, in the sense that it concerns the nervous system, sure. Belief, yes, absolutely. Belief is a big mental state, especially in philosophy of mind. Fatigue, yeah, that would be like a sensation. You're feeling tired. Or seeing, I would say perceiving. We can have perceptual states. Sleeping, maybe. I would say absolutely when we're dreaming. Having intentions, sure. Right? So there are lots of mental states. Yet another set of questions, and this is a big one for Kim, concerns the nature of the relationship between the mind and the body. This is a central question not only for Kim, but also for most philosophers of mind. Um, and this question even goes back to Plato, right? We probably won't talk much about this. We'll probably look at the mind-body problem mostly in the context of René Descartes' work, but it does go all the way back to Plato. in ancient Greece. Um, what do you think? How do you think the mind and body are related to one another? Now, Kim says the mental seems prima facie so utterly different from the physical, and yet the two seem intimately related to each other. Thoughts? Samuel, go ahead.
Okay, so I think the body is how we receive and receive stimuli, sensations, and then the mind is what is how we depend is how we sorry is how we interpret those sensations, right? So it
Okay.
accomplish two different things. Like so, the body's basically like it's where we receive the input, and then the brain is where we in the mind is where we interpret that input, and then our mind is where we make decisions on how we interact and on how our body interacts with the external.
Okay.
Did
Do
I
you think they're
this
two different things?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Shush, shush. Sorry, my dog is barking.
Two different domains essentially.
Okay.
Like our body is where we interact with the physical, and our mind is how we interpret that interaction.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Lee, what do you think?
I think that the mind and the body are like so intimately connected that sometimes you can't really tell them apart, kind of like, for example, in certain, like with severe mental illness, a lot of the symptoms can be like very physiological, you know? Like if you're clinically depressed, there's going to be all kinds of things in your body that are out of whack that don't really have much to do with your brain. Like your circadian rhythm gets all messed up. Um, every like your perception of just the world around you is like in slow motion, and like you feel like you can't move as quickly. um so I don't know, I think they're very very connected. I think that once we start talking about like the brain being like the big boss and then the body is just like the filter through which we see reality, I think that tends to lean towards like brain piloting a slab of meat arguments, which I
Yeah.
don't think is true.
Yeah, very good. So far, um, a couple really good answers so far. So the mind and brain are like different domains. And then the mind and the body, or the mind and brain and body, if you like, are so intimately connected that it's hard to disentangle the mental from the physical. Leo says, interestingly in the chat, that he's a property dualist. So the mental is a property of the physical brain. And I think that while that's a type of dualism, it does underscore um, that sort of connected nature between the mental and the physical. So we'll say more about property dualism momentarily. Joshua, what do you think?
I would say they must be connected, given, for example, the placebo effect,
Yeah,
where if you think incredibly hard about something, it could result in symptoms showing up in the body, which has been shown through various studies. So I'd say they must be at least somehow related to each other, since the mind can influence the body physically.
very good. Yeah. I would say, yeah, you've made a good point. And that sounds a lot like what Lee was saying as well. So there are the effects of mental illness, the placebo effect, even, like acts of sheer willpower you hear about. It always reminds me of David Blaine, where he's like, okay, I'm going to freeze myself in a block of ice for a week and not die. It seems like it takes a tremendous amount of willpower to do something like that, right? Mind over matter, as they say. Hayden, what do you think?
I would argue like that there isn't really a good way of even saying that they're separate things on a certain level, at least because the at least the sensations of someone's body and the state of someone's body, it affects every aspect of their mind, I would argue, right? Like if somebody is in pain, that will affect how they perceive everything around them. If someone's hungry, like people get hangry. So I feel
Yeah.
like you can't really I feel like you can't really separate the two, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. I think this is something that right, like which is probably due in a great measure to Rene Descartes, but again, it does go back to Plato. And I mentioned this last time during our introductory lecture or our course overview lecture. But for most of the history of philosophy, the mind simply was the soul, and the soul was not a material thing. But now we've started to realize, even in Descartes' time and shortly thereafter, um, we started to realize that the physical can certainly affect the mental, right? Even just a very mundane example like coffee. By the way, you're going to hear me make a lot of coffee references, a lot of coffee analogies. I always have a cup of coffee when I'm lecturing, sometimes more than one. But look, coffee contains a molecule called caffeine. Sure, we all know that. Caffeine um, is shaped like neurotransmitters that we have in our brains. And neurotransmitters are little chemical messengers that affect how information travels across our synapses, right? So in the case of coffee, I got some caffeine in here, and that goes into my acetylcholine receptors, and that makes me feel less tired. If you really look forward to your coffee every day, you're probably also getting some stimulation of the dopamine system, of the pleasure reward system. So coffee can make you feel less sleepy, and it can also be habit forming for these reasons, right? That's the physical affecting the mental. Um, Let's see. Holly says if twins have identical DNA, identical bodies, why can they interpret the same environmental stimuli differently? I would say because even identical twins are not as identical as we once thought. And this is thanks to epigenetics, right? You might start out with the same DNA as your twin, but how things get expressed might depend on certain things, certain environmental factors. And yeah, like Liam says here, they don't have the exact same experiences either, which is why they are different people, even though they're genetically identical or very similar. Push, what do you think?
Sorry. So just to confirm, could you just say the question again? Because I misheard. I might have
Oh,
misheard it.
well, we were just kind of spitballing how the mental and physical are related to one another.
Okay. So realistically, without the mind, your body wouldn't be able to do anything. And then without your body, you can't do anything with like your mind is gonna make you do an action, but your body's that thing that's actually doing the action, right?
Hmm.
So it kind of goes like they have to be connected. Well, not have to be, but in my opinion, they are connected because let's say I got injured in some way, let's say on my leg, that pain, I can still experience that through my, like, I still feel it in my mind and everything, right? And now I'm unable to do a certain task, let's say a walk. Even if my mind wants to, I can't do
Hmm.
it because I, well, I'm just injured, right? So I have that
Yep.
pain in that. Like, so it's basically like they're kind of intertwined with each other because without the body, I can't really do much with my mind. And without my mind, I can't really do much with my body.
Yeah. Um, okay. Yeah, thank you. Holly says, wouldn't that suggest that there might be a separate mental state than the body? Well, let's circle back to this when we talk about supervenience. Because before we launch into this, I really want to be clear on what we mean by mind-body supervenience. No, but it's good that you're thinking out loud, Holly. Don't stop doing that. But I'm going to circle back to that. Um, Lee, go ahead, please.
Yeah, while we're on the topic, I wrote down a question from the readings. So Descartes thought of the mind as like an object or like a thing that's separate from the body, even if it's like a non-physical thing.
Hmm.
And then today we think of the mind as like a property, or like having a mind is like having a property of like that is in the thing that is
Yeah.
us. So is this because the mind can't exist with like a without like a physical host, but like also can't a thing be both an object and a property? Because like a virus also needs a host, or like a parasite needs a
Yeah.
host to survive. You know what I mean?
So, yo, okay, yeah. Well, I would say objects and their properties are different things, and we'll clarify this in a moment. But objects and
Okay.
their properties are different. Um, but the properties that an object has are some of the things that individuate that object, make it
Yeah.
distinct from other objects, right? Um, the mind needing a host. Well, let's talk about that. Um, what Kim is doing here is gesturing at something called the mind-body problem. That's the problem of explaining how the mind and body are related to one another. And there's a number of different ways we can try and make sense of this relation. We've already touched on a few of them here, right? Maybe having a mind is not like a thing you have, but it's a process or a property that you instantiate, right? I'll put it to you this way. Where is your mind? Where is your mind? No wrong answers. Just what do you think? Where is it? Is it in here? Is it? Is it in the skull? Your brain is, but is that where your mind is? Is your mind in your brain? Here's another question. Think of something, anything, like this coffee cup. Where is your thought? Is your thought in your mind? If you think that it is, or if you think that the mind is in the head, you might be making a category mistake. And we'll explain why as we proceed. Um, if a person becomes clinically brain dead, we don't see mind. But if they lose limbs, there's still a mind to observe. Yeah. Oh, this must relate to the phantom pain comment. Yeah. Well, we can talk about phantom pain briefly. Phantom pain happens because although you're missing a limb, the part of your brain called the somatosensory cortex, the part on that part of the cortex that represents that part of the body, even though the limb is missing, that part is not missing. So your brain can still represent a phantom limb, even though the limb is missing. Um, that's a very, very brief answer to why phantom limb syndrome happens. Hayden says, I don't think the mind physically exists. I don't really think mind and brain are synonymous because people with half their brain removed still have a mind, not half a mind. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And Lee says, I'd argue that my mind sometimes crosses the boundaries of my body when I make art or post things on the internet. Yeah, that reminds me of, or even your phone being one of your limbs. Yeah, that's the extended mind hypothesis, right? Mentality is not in the head. Mentality is something that creatures with brains and bodies in a dynamic environment exhibit, right? So your phone in that case is what we might call a cognitive artifact, right? Um, do you see why the mind body problem is a problem? I mean, let's put aside, all the questions I've asked so far. What is a mind? Where is the mind? Where are things that are in the mind? Are things that are in the mind in a literal sense? As if your mind is a space filled up with mental items. Forget those. Why is the mind body problem a problem? I kind of gesture at it here. Well, I mean, the mental and the physical seem so different, don't they? But this is getting more at what David Chalmers calls the easy problems and the hard problems of consciousness. But think about it. The brain, the body, these are physical things. We're talking about nerves firing, synapses with neurotransmitters floating around in them. And these things give rise to mental events like all our beliefs, our desires, our sensations, etc. But these seem like two very different kinds of things, right? I can look at a brain state objectively. I can take objective scientific measurements of a brain. I could scan your brains if I wanted to and say, oh, this is what kind of activity is happening in this part of the cortex, etc., right? That's easy. Answering questions to do with that stuff, those are easy problems. But how does that give rise to subjective conscious experience or to deliberative rational thought or free will? These things are all like experienced, radically subjective things, right? So these two things, the physical and the mental, seem so different from one another. How is it that they are related? That's why it's such an interesting problem because it's really somewhat mysterious how these things are related to one another, right? We can say like, oh, sure, when these neurons fire, that means you're seeing, the color blue, for example. Okay, how does that work? How do neurons firing get me to this subjective experience of the color blue? How does that work? Right? We understand everything like, specific wavelengths of light hit the retina, which cause the rods and cones to fire. That sends a signal down the optic tract to the optic nerve to the primary visual areas in your occipital lobe. Great. That's easy. Why do I see blue and not some other color? That's a hard problem. Or how is it that my intention to raise my arm causes my arm to go up? My intention, I'm going to raise my arm now, is a mental state, not a physical state. So how is it that it causes my arm to go up? It's somewhat mysterious, right? That's why this is such an interesting problem. Yes, Holly, yeah, that's exactly right. Psychology kind of gave up on this, which is weird because, it started out with like psychophysics, right? Where we were figuring out like, oh, these wavelengths of light are associated with this sort of perceived luminosity, and this level of sound pressure is this many decibels of loudness, right? And then psychology kind of turned away from psychophysics and went to behaviorism, where it was like, let's forget about the mental and just focus on behavior. And yeah, when the cognitive revolution happened, we went back the other way. So yeah, the mind-body problem is kind of perplexing, and it's related to other questions that we have, like whether mental events can cause physical events. Like when I decide to raise my arm, is it my mental state that causes my arm to go up? Or was my brain kind of deciding that on its own, and my mental state is just kind of an epiphenomena or an epiphenomenon that doesn't have any causal role to play whatsoever? Does my belief that I'm hungry and my desire to satisfy that hunger cause me to go make a sandwich? Or are the beliefs and desires just epiphenomena and it's all neurons firing and I'm just some kind of flesh robot, right? This is related to the problem of mental causation, which we're going to get to toward the end of the book. So, I guess we should talk about metaphysics for a little bit before we go on our break. It could be argued that, yeah, that's Kim is worried about this, right? Because Kim. We'll see as we make our way through the book. Kim says, "Look, it looks like mind-body supervenience is true, but if mind-body supervenience is true, epiphenomenalism is true, and if epiphenomenalism is true, that's pretty unnerving." right? So let's not get ahead of ourselves, but yeah, you're right. It could be argued that it's not, I don't think this is what Kim wants to be the case, but he's certainly worried about it. Okay, let's talk about metaphysical preliminaries. What is metaphysics? Anybody know? Any philosophy people in the room who are familiar with metaphysics? As I say here, you can think of it as the study of reality. Um, the term actually comes from Aristotle. He wrote some books called The Physics, Ta Bibliota Physica, the Book of Physics, which is all about the natural world. And then he had a set of books that came after the physics, Ta Bibliota Metaphysica, the books that come after the physics. So metaphysics, technically, I guess if you want to translate it, means after the physics. But what we mean by metaphysics is like, not studying the natural world, but studying stuff that's kind of like above or beyond the natural world, right? Like a physicist might use a lot of math to understand physical processes in the natural world. A metaphysician might say, well, what are numbers? Do they exist? Right? So if you're a metaphysician, you're asking questions like, what kinds of things exist? And what are the things that exist like? We've already kind of been doing a little bit of metaphysics here, right? We've already, by following Kim, asked what kinds of things there are. Well, there are things that are not alive, and there are things that are alive. And of the things that are alive, there are things that think and things that do not think. And maybe there are some things that are not alive that might be said to think too, like computers, right? So we're already doing metaphysics. No, it's not quite like that. That's a good guess, but um, metaphysics is not just the study of subjective metaphysics is asking fundamental questions about what exists. So, like I said, um, just in our discussion today, we've done metaphysics by exploring the kinds of things that exist, and we know that there are things that are alive and things that are not alive. There are things that think, and there are things that do not think. What other things might there be, right? I mentioned numbers a moment ago. A physicist is going to use mathematics to try and um, describe law-like relations in the natural world. But a metaphysician is going to be more abstract than that. Um, what other things may or may not exist that a metaphysician might be interested in studying besides animate and inanimate beings or mental and non-mental beings? Lee?
I guess like a physicist would be looking at like the mechanism of the Big Bang and how it happened, but a metaphysician would be like, why should anything exist?
Yeah.
Why did why should anything exist at all?
Yeah. Why is there something rather than nothing, right?
Right, exactly. That's what I meant.
A
Yeah.
physicist is going to be like, well, there is something, so let's figure out how that something came to be. But a
Yeah.
metaphysician might be like, but why? But why? Right? Um,
Right.
like
So it's
Hayden, yeah, is God real? Yeah, metaphysicians, along with theologists, might be like, is there a God? And if there is, what is God like? So it's a little more abstract, right? Um, free will. Is there free will? That's a metaphysical question. Um, so yeah, just think of metaphysics as the study of reality. We want to know what kinds of things are real, what things exist, and then we want to know what those things are like. What kinds of things are they? What makes them the things they are, as opposed to other things, etc., etc. Lee?
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm a bit like, what's the difference between metaphysics and just like philosophy in general? Because this is sounding very general, you
Well,
know? I guess
philosophy,
'cause-
yeah.
yeah.
So metaphysics is a big part of philosophy, but philosophy remember, can be fundamental questions about anything. So, there are many branches of philosophy. One of them is metaphysics. One that's closely related to metaphysics is philosophy of mind.
Okay.
There's also ethics. So,
You're right.
what's right and wrong? How do you live a good life? There's aesthetics, right? What is beauty? Um, there's what's another interesting area? Well, logic is a big one. Logic is the
Yeah.
science of proper reasoning, right? So all of these fall under the philosophy umbrella.
Okay. I guess metaphysics is kind of like a stereotypical like philosophical area because like we don't think about aesthetics or logic as much, but if someone it's like there's this anyway, whatever, I'm not gonna sorry.
No, I understand. Yeah, I think the image that most non-philosophers have of philosophers that tends to be philosophers thinking about metaphysical questions as opposed to other questions. But nowadays, philosophy is very much like we have a lot of different philosophies of, right? Where we just ask fundamental questions about various things. Primary and second equalities. Yeah, so I would say this is kind of like related to an area of metaphysics called ontology, right? The study of beings. So that's right. So let's talk about the metaphysics of mind. I think we'll go on, maybe finish this slide and try to have a break. So let's talk about Descartes. Um, what is it to have a mind if you're Rene Descartes or if you're a follower of Descartes? Well, like I've sort of gestured at, for Descartes, having a mind basically amounts to having a soul. And what is a soul? A soul is a thing that thinks. It's a res cogitans. So that's Latin for a thinking thing. The soul is a thinking thing. And that thinking thing is a substance. A similar idea, as I've already said, goes all the way back to Plato. Plato thought that we have souls, and not only do we have souls, but we have different parts of souls, parts of the soul. There is the rational part of the soul, the part of the soul with logos, or the logistikon, I think it's called. That's the part that does the thinking. But there's also thumos and eros. So eros is what we could think of as the appetitive soul. Uh, your drives and desires. Um, and thumos is your spirited soul, your passions, your emotions. Aristotle also has three parts of the soul, but for Aristotle, the soul is not some kind of spirit that leaves the body when you die. For Aristotle, the soul is the form of an organized body. So once you're dead, you're dead. But the thing that keeps you alive is the way your body is put together and the way it runs. It's the form that makes the matter of your body the way it is. Um, but Descartes abandons a lot of the Aristotelian metaphysics that had sort of dominated philosophy during the Middle Ages, like scholastic philosophy. But he does hang on to this idea that's common to both Plato and Aristotle of the rational soul, and that's his thinking substance, his thinking thing. Now, a lot of philosophers are not Cartesians any longer. Um, we'll get into why when we talk about Descartes. Not next week. I forgot to fix that. Not next week, but on Wednesday. That's not to say that philosophers think we don't have minds. They just don't think our minds are res cogitans or thinking substance. They don't think our minds is a Cartesian sort of soul. Many thinkers would agree with something like this. Having a mind, Kim says, can be construed simply as having a certain group of properties, features, and capacities that are possessed by humans and some higher animals, but absent in things like rocks and trees. It is less misleading, therefore, to speak of mentality than of having a mind. The surface grammar of the latter abets the problematic idea of a substantival mind, mind as an object of a special kind. A mind is not something you have in here, as I was trying to get at earlier, right? A mind is something you do, if I can put it that way. One of the biggest critics of Descartes, the 20th century philosopher Gilbert Ryle, he characterized Descartes' view of the mental as the dogma of the ghost in the machine. As if the body is a machine, uh, as Descartes believed, created by God, and the soul, your immortal soul, also created by God, is a bit like the pilot of this flesh robot, a ghost in the machine. But Ryle actually thought that we're making a category mistake by doing this. Minds aren't that kind of thing. Minds aren't like substances that we have or souls that we have. The mind is more like a process, right? So it's a category error. So we'll look at that more next week, but just keep that in mind for now. Other metaphysical takes on the mind, some of which we touched upon last time. Some identify the mind with the brain. We call them identity theorists. And some liken the mind to an information processing system, such as a computer. So it matters not what the mind is made of, but what it is that it's doing. If something functions in a certain type of way, like as a mind or a computer, well, then it's a mind, right? I think we should probably take a break. How about we take a 15-minute break? We'll come back around 4. Sound good? This way I can prepare more coffee. Very good. Okay, so I will see you all at 4. Okay. I hope everybody had a good brain break. Now we will resume. Let me just share my screen. Right, so we were talking about a few different metaphysical positions on the mind, right? A big one that's going to be of concern for us is dualism, namely the substance dualism of Rene Descartes. So we will look at this more next week, but remember that for Rene Descartes, the mind is a thinking substance, the body is an extended substance. It takes up space, it has mass, etc. The mind is not like that. The mind is a non-physical substance. It's not the only way to think of the mind. There's also identity theory, so the mind is the brain, or functionalism. The mind is a functional system. Some other terminology that we're going to need to be familiar with surrounds substances and properties, right? We've already mentioned one substance, a thinking substance, but what is a substance, right? Just what is a substance? Anybody have any idea what a substance is? Well, there's actually a few different ways we can answer this question. For Aristotle, for example, each of us is a substance. I'm a substance, you're a substance. And we have different attributes, right? I'm a substance, but I have attributes that distinguish me from other similar substances, other human beings, right? Things like the color of my hair or my height, right? Another way to understand substances is due to John Locke. Substances are just that to which properties adhere. When we take away all the properties, we are left with substance. What is substance? Well, John Locke famously wrote, "We know not what." It's just whatever all the properties are stuck together on, right? That's kind of the way Kim understands properties. He understands properties and substances in the following way. Properties inhere within substances. So, substances, whatever a substance is, it's something that can exist independently, and properties inhere within it. Um, we'll also encounter a lot of talk about not just properties, but events, mental and physical events. We'll talk about mental states, um, facts, if there are facts about the mental, right? Another thing that's going to be pretty important as we undertake this learning journey is the notion of mind-body supervenience. So definitely want to keep mind-body supervenience in mind. To get a grip on what mind-body supervenience is, we're going to use a science fiction example. We're going to, if we are familiar with it, well, if you're not familiar with it, you will be shortly, but think of something like the matter energy transporter from Star Trek, right? Anybody familiar with this example? Beam me up, Scotty, et cetera, et cetera. What does the transporter do? I mean, it transports, right? It's there in the name. But how does it do that? Lee?
As far as I understand it, it like takes all of your particles and like transposes them somewhere else, and then all of your particles that make you up sort of like gather together wherever you want to go. Is
Yeah.
that I feel like that's how it works.
Yeah, basically, like the idea is, well, first, and this is just a bit of trivia that's completely unrelated to the course, but the invention of the transporter was entirely due to budgetary constraints, right? When they were filming the original Star Trek television show back in the 60s, they didn't have the budget to shoot them going to and from various planets in a little space shuttle. So they just said, what if there was a transporter that took all of the matter that you were made of, converted it to energy, beamed it to where you wanted to go, and then converted that energy back to matter, right? Because we know that matter and energy are interchangeable, right? E equals mc square and all that. But what if there was a real device that could do that? Well, if there was a device that could transport you in such a way, that device might also be able to duplicate you. In fact, this is something that happens on in a few different episodes of Star Trek from a few different iterations of the show, right? Um, I forget the title of the episode, but there is an episode in the original series where Captain Kirk is duplicated and there's like a good Kirk and an evil Kirk, and they have to use the transporter to put him back together again and reintegrate him. There's an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation where Commander Riker finds out he has a transporter duplicate. And there's the very famous or maybe even infamous example of Tuvix from Star Trek Voyager, which if you've seen that, well, that was just that didn't work out well for Tuvix, but I'll just leave that there. Maybe you can talk about that in the Discord server so that we don't go too far down this rabbit hole. But if you could duplicate yourself with a transporter, would your duplicate then have the same mental properties in addition to the same physical properties as the original? And this is a thought experiment, by the way, right? So there aren't any wrong answers. What thought experiments are for are, to paraphrase Dan Dennett, they're for getting our intuitions pumping. They're for testing our beliefs and our concepts about certain things. So, what do you guys think? Let's say I have a matter energy transporter and some kind of Star Trek sort of transporter accident occurs where, sure, I think I beamed down to planet X or whatever, but there's really been an accident, and there's one of me down there on the planet and another of me on the ship, and we're physically identical. We've been physically duplicated. Would the both of us also have the same mental properties, right? So if original me is the one that was beamed down onto the planet, would the copy of me on the ship also have mental properties in addition to physical properties like I do? What do you think? Lee?
I think that like they would start out the same, but then as they were exposed to different stimuli, they would kind of turn into different people, even though they're kind of similar. But then the longer they both exist doing different things, they would become different.
Sure.
Like their
Yeah. Yeah.
personalities would.
Right. We would be two new individuals at that point. Right. But
Yeah.
the question is, would something that is physically like I'm me now, I'm
Right.
made of matter. There are physical properties like my brain states, but I also have mental states. The
Yeah.
question is, if you copied me physically, molecule for molecule, would my copy also have a mind? Or would it be like a philosophical zombie? Would it be physically identical but with no mental states? That's the question.
Mm. I think it would have a mind.
It would have a mind. Okay.
I think so. Like, because this is basically just asking if Descartes was right or not, right? Like, if the soul is this like separate thing, then duplicating someone physically doesn't do anything in terms of giving them a mind.
Yes.
But since we've already kind of established that like the mind and the body are like are like almost this sort of so interrelated that it's almost the same thing, then I think Descartes is wrong.
Yeah, that's
Right?
right. And Leo says it's kind of like the ship of Theseus. Yeah. Well, yeah. This is more to do with questions about identity, though, right? You're not wrong. We are kind of like, every 7 years or so, all of our cells have basically been replaced. Um, so you're not the same. You're not made of the same matter you were before, but you are the same person. Sure, that is right. But the question is, as I said, is a physically identical copy of me also um, the kind of thing that would have a mind? Or is it like Lee says, if you copied me, would the copy of me be a mindless automaton? Because we cannot copy the soul, because the soul is non-physical, right? Now, Lee said that they wouldn't be the same, or they would. Like it would. So Lee 1 and Lee 2 would both have mentality, right? You'd be different Lees. We could say Lee 1 and Lee 2, or Lee original and Lee transporter clone, right? But you'd each have a mind, right? But somebody who subscribes to Descartes might say, no, only original Lee has a mind because that's who has the soul. Transporter clone Lee, no soul. We only copied the physical, not the non-physical, right? So maybe transporter clone Lee would be a philosophical zombie, and original Lee is a thinking thing, right? That's what we're getting at here. So if you say you would be the same in the sense that you would both have a mind, you wouldn't be the same person anymore. Now there are two different individuals. It's called a fission case uh, or a duplication case, right? So we'd have two new individuals, sure. But the important thing for us is that there would be two minds now, since all of the physical stuff has been copied. So if you agree with that, you probably endorse the mind-body supervenience thesis number one right here. Uh, Now, Joshua says, I think it depends on whether or not the mind exists as energy in the first place. For example, if the mind was actually just the specific arrangement of stored electrical signals in your brain. If it was the case, the properties would be the same. But if the mind is not part of energy, then I don't think it would be the same properties since there can only be one mind. Yeah. I get what you're saying. Yeah. And I think the gist of this is right. I wouldn't describe it in terms of energy, though. The mind is not simply, uh, the mind isn't exclusively electrical. The brain is not exclusively electrical. The brain is electrochemical. Um, but you're right when you say that if the physical properties are the same, then the mental properties should be the same. That's that's mind-body supervenience. Um, so mind-body supervenience thesis one says that the mental supervenes on the physical in that things, objects, events, organisms, persons, and so on, that are exactly alike in all physical properties cannot differ with respect to mental properties. That is, physical indiscernibility entails psychological indiscernibility. So if there is a transporter clone of Josh, then those transporter clones, being physically identical, must each have minds because the original Josh had a mind. So if we copy all of my physical properties and create a duplicate, that duplicate will not be a philosophical zombie, a creature that is, all dark inside, to paraphrase David Chalmers. No, that creature will have a mind just like I have a mind because the mental supervenes on the physical. A different formulation of this, mind body supervenience 2, is called strong supervenience. And this is where we get a little bit more technical. Mind body supervenience 2 says the mental supervenes on the physical in that if anything X has a mental property M, there is a physical property P such that X has P, and necessarily any object that has P has M. You want me to unpack this a little bit for you? Because this is one of those technical things, right? Holly. Yes, okay. No problem. That's what I'm here for. Let's get the old digital pen. Okay, so there is some X. So let's make an X. This X can be whatever we want it to be. It could be me. Let's say it's me. Okay? Now M has or X has mental property M. Okay? M can be whatever we want it to be. Maybe being in pain, right? That's the sort of running example that philosophers of mind tend to use quite often is being in pain. So let's say that I am X. X refers to me. There is a person called Josh who has mental state M, and that mental state is being in pain. So here we'll just so that we know, we'll just write pain. This is really hard to write with a mouse. Now, that mental state supervenes on P, the physical state. And that could be, let's say that's my C fibers firing. I'm sorry for how messy this is. What I really need is a pen and not a mouse. So any X that has P, necessarily that object has to have M. So I'm X and my C fibers are firing. That means I am in pain. Let's sub out some different examples. Let's get my eraser and just get rid of this here. Get rid of this right here. So X, we'll broaden it out a bit and just say that X is anything with a mind. So X is something with a mind. X is something that can have mental properties. So my mental property M can be whatever mental property I want it to be. It could be a belief, it could be a desire, it could be a sensation, it could be an emotion, it could be an intention, etc., etc. So let's come up with one. What should our mind have in terms of mental states? What's a mental state? Let's come up with one. I need a mental state, any mental state. Well, let's say it's a belief that it's raining. My mental state is a belief that it's raining. Okay, so that means if supervenience is true, then my mental state supervenes on a physical state, which could be a brain state. Certain synapses are firing in a certain way, and that realizes my mental state. So any other X with a similar physical state, those neurons firing in that particular way, will also have the belief that it's raining. You see? What are some other ones? Do we want to keep going with this? Is everybody kind of clear on what I mean? Lee's good. Anyone else? I'll tell you what, don't be shy, but if you're not getting it, if you need more examples, don't be shy about speaking up. Because this is very abstract, right? It's very technical. Josh has got it. Holly wants one more. Okay, so let's say there is a mind having entity that has mental state M. Mental state M might be, I don't know, a desire to dance. And that desire is realized by certain physical states, neurons firing in a certain sort of way in the brain, right? Now, if supervenience is true, then any other creature, a different person in this case, that has that physical state, those intention to dance neurons firing, they're also going to have the mental state of intending to dance. This is why we usually keep it simple with examples like pain, because it's not straightforwardly clear, and we'll see this when we get into identity theory, that the physical state that underwrites my intention to go and dance is probably not identical to yours. They might be two tokens of the same type of mental state, but they're not identical mental or physical states, but they're not identical physical states. So, yeah, they're correlated. And importantly, the physical state causes the mental state, but if we change it up a bit, so let's say this is physical state, whoops. So we've got physical and mental state 1 and 2. State 1, mental state 2, and physical state 2. The physical state causes mental state 1 and physical state 2. Physical state 2 then causes mental state 2. Mental state 1 does not cause mental state 2. That's epiphenomenalism. Just keep that in mind for later. All right, let's get rid of this. Rather messy. I should just have a whiteboard for this. Maybe I'll get one. So that's strong supervenience. Then there's global supervenience, which is pretty strong. Mind-body supervenience 3, or the global supervenience thesis, states that the mental supervenes on the physical in that worlds that are alike in all physical respects are alike in all mental respects as well. In fact, worlds that are physically alike are exactly alike overall. So you see why 1 is stronger than, or see why 2 is stronger than 1. If we go back to 1, we can see that it's not as precisely formulated. And the claim here is that things that are exactly alike in all physical properties cannot differ with respect to mental properties. This is formulated a little bit more precisely. And this is called global because it applies to all possible worlds, not just this world, all logically possible worlds. That's something else. When we talk about metaphysics, we deal with possible worlds, and what we mean are logically possible worlds, not physically possible worlds. So we're not talking about like a Rick and Morty type multiverse sort of idea. We're talking about how things logically could have otherwise been. And what this says is that in any world that is alike in all physical respects to this world, so the laws of physics are all the same, there's the same sort of stuff that you find, right? So possible world number 1 is physically identical to this world because the laws of physics are all the same, and there's the same sorts of matter and energy out there. So the universe is like mostly hydrogen, some helium, and then all the other elements. The laws of physics are the same, et cetera, et cetera. In a world like that, all mental, a world like that that's identical in all physical respects, that means that if there were mental creatures in that possible world, they also could not differ with respect to their mental respects if the physical respects are the same. So if there was if there's original Josh, we can talk about me getting duplicated in a transporter, and then all of a sudden now there's two Joshes, but since we're physically alike, physically identical, the duplicate of me has mental states like I do. We're not talking about an in-universe version of this, but a multiverse version. Only our multiple worlds are possible worlds, like possible logical worlds. Okay, do you understand or do you not understand? Let me know. Don't again, if you feel like you're not getting it, don't be shy because I know this stuff is highly abstract. What this entails is that if there was a possible world where there was another Josh that was physically identical with me in this world, that Josh in the alternate universe would have mental states the same as I do. I would have mentality in that universe as well as this one. It wouldn't be a universe of philosophical zombies. That's what this supervenience thesis implies. And since we've been talking about physical facts, physical states, mental states, etc., we should probably distinguish between materialism and physicalism. Yeah. Yeah, that's right, Holly. Exactly. Like, so if there was another possible world where, like a mirror universe, where all of the physical properties were the same, so the laws of physics are the same kinds of matter exist, etc., and there was another Josh in that universe, he would have a mind. That's all that means. It means that supervenience holds in all possible worlds. Okay, so materialism and physicalism. Kim writes that materialism is the doctrine that all things that exist in the world are bits of matter or aggregates of bits of matter. There is nothing or no thing that isn't a material thing. No transcendental beings, Hegelian absolutes, or immaterial minds. Physicalism is the contemporary successor to materialism. Why do we have two different terms here? Well, materialism, if you go back far enough, is really due to Democritus. Democritus is usually lumped in with the pre-Socratics, even though he was a contemporary of Socrates. Um, Liam, yeah, you could think of it that way. Although it's logically possible that it's not like that. But maybe the closest possible world is like this. Um, the point is, though, like I said, if the physical properties are the same, the mental properties have to be the same because of supervenience. Okay, so Democritus thought that everything was atoms and void. Atoms, the atoms of Democritus were not like today's atoms. Democritus believed that atoms were indivisible bits of matter. That's where the word comes from. Atom, the word atom that we use, atom, is cognate with the Greek atomos, which means like unbreakable or indivisible. Um, the word atomos is also cognate with, for example, the word diamond, right? Diamonds are very hard. They're almost uncuttable, right? You need another diamond to cut a diamond, right? Or have you ever met somebody who's adamant about something? They're unchangeable, unbreakable. Or are there any X-Men fans? What are Wolverine's bones made of? Yeah, adamantium. It all means unbreakable. No, no, I think you got it right. It's a fictional material, but yeah, he's got adamantium coated there, and that's why his claws are so sharp and everything, right? It's a fictional material, but it's got a good name. Um, so nowadays we understand that atoms are actually divisible, right? That's the whole idea behind nuclear fission, splitting the atom. But for Democritus, it was just atoms and void. And materialism, you know, kind of stayed materialism up to the the Age of Enlightenment. But as physics, as modern physics really got going, as Holly says here in the chat, we realized that we needed more than just bits of matter, right? Like force. You mentioned force, Holly. Yeah. Um, a force field, like an electromagnetic field or a gravitational field, isn't made of material, but it's physical, right? So materialism, we in physics, we've got matter and energy. If we were all materialists, we'd only be looking at energy, or only looking at matter, as if matter is all that exists. But matter is not all that exists. There's also energy. But energy is still physical. So, when we say physicalism, we say what fundamentally exists are the sorts of things studied by physicists, the things that we find in the natural world, matter and energy and force fields, right? And all of the associated characteristics and properties, right? Now, some physicalists do believe there are non-physical properties, right? Maybe moral properties or aesthetic properties, mental properties, but all of these supervene on physical properties. So the physical is what is most fundamental. So, my brain is ultimately physical. It's an electrochemical organ, which means its physical states are somewhat energetic and somewhat material, but it's all physical, right? My mental states might not be physical though, because they supervene on those physical states. Moral properties might supervene on physical properties, right? We might say it is wrong to punch kittens, right? We'd say that that's a morally wrong thing to do. And that supervenes on all of the physical properties involved, right? The force with which you punch the kitten, the physical changes in the kitten's nervous system, which cause it to experience the mental state of pain, right? It all supervenes on physical properties or aesthetic properties, right? What makes a particular work of art laudable or admirable or beautiful? Well, whatever it is, it's got to supervene on physical properties. Like, did anyone take a look and notice the little banner I've used for this course on Brightspace, the image in the banner? What work of art is it? You can go and check now. It's fine. Let's look together. Let me just get out of the screen share thing here. Oh no, I'm gonna have to share my screen. Oh, I messed up. No, we need to share the screen, but we need to get out of the slideshow. That's what we need to do. Oh, goodness. Okay. So here we are on Brightspace. Oh, good. Thank you. Holly got it. Yeah, this is an image of The Thinker by Rodin. Now, what do we think of this? What do we think of The Thinker as a work of art? Just describe it to me. What impressions does it leave you with? I think it's cool. What do you think it is? Maybe it doesn't leave you with any impressions at all. That's fine too. Yeah, pondering. Well, that's what he's doing. How would you describe it? Is it beautiful? Is it interesting? What is it? Lee?
I think it kind of uh it like idolizes the process of like internal mental kind of intellectual actions or thoughts. Like
Mhm.
It's this
So
giant statue on like a big pedestal of just this guy, obviously in deep thought. Um, and it kind of calls back to like the Greek statues and the Roman statues of like, like buff, naked guys doing beautiful things and being generally very aesthetically pleasing. And it's
yeah,
kind of using that visual language to render the same kind of glory or whatever onto like just thinking and being intellectual and all that stuff.
yeah. So you might say you could say it's romantic in the sense that it romanticizes rational thought, right? Casey says it's inspiring. Joshua says it reflects what it means to be human. And all of this, according to Kim, all of these properties supervene on the statue's physical properties, such that if there was a molecule for molecule duplicate of the thinker, it would still be inspiring to Casey, or it would still seem to be romanticizing rationality to Lee, right? Um, I think there are some aestheticians who might debate this, um, because only one of them was actually carved by Rodin or cast or whatever, right? I remember a debate going around, right? There were these autograph machines. So like if a famous author can sign one book while he's hooked up to this autograph machine, and then you could use the autograph machine to sign thousands of books. And some people were like, "Oh, I think that would be so cool. I'd love one of those books." But it's not the same to me because, part of getting an autograph is the experience of being there and meeting the person and asking the audience. And it's a special, or asking the person for an autograph. And it's like a sort of like a special moment in space and time, right? So I don't know if we transporter cloned The Thinker by Rodin, if the clone would really be as interesting or inspiring to people. But anyway. A lot of people think that the supervenience thesis affirms the following, as written by Kim. Many philosophers regard the supervenience thesis as affirming a relation of dependence or determination between the mental and the physical. That is, the mental properties a given thing has depend on or are determined by the physical properties it has. And that was what I was trying to illustrate before when I said that X has mental property M and physical property P. M depends on P or is determined by P. So that when the physical state changes, it's that new physical state that causes the new mental state, not the original mental state that causes the mental state. We could formulate a mind-body dependence thesis, in fact, as Kim has done. And it might go something like this. The mental properties a given thing has depend upon and are determined by the physical properties it has. That is, our psychological character is wholly determined by our physical nature. And this implies what Kim describes as a sort of minimal physicalism, right? Everything mental depends upon the physical, in this case, the brain and the nervous system. Physicalism, by the way, as a metaphysical theory, is a type of substance monism. So we were talking about substances earlier, and we'll talk about them more in future. Rene Descartes is, of course, a substance dualist because he thinks that there are two fundamental kinds of substance, thinking substance and extended substance. A physicalist would say, no, there's only extended substance. There's only the physical, matter and energy and all of the associated properties. So minimal physicalism says that everything mental depends upon the physical. Substance physicalism is the metaphysical theory. Substance physicalism might be formulated the way Kim has put it here on page 13. All that exists in this world are bits of matter in space-time and aggregate structures composed of bits of matter. There's nothing else in the space-time world. I guess aggregate structures is supposed to mean, well, this is materialism. This is not physicalism. Um, not to be too critical here. Uh, Remember that on physicalism, it's not just matter and bits of matter and structures of matter. It's also energy. It's also force fields, things like electromagnetism and gravitation. Properties like mass and charge, right? These are all physical things. You don't have to be a substance dualist, though, if you want to be a dualist. I think one of you in the chat earlier mentioned that you are a fan of property dualism, which is a kind of non-reductive physicalism. Property dualism says that the psychological properties of any system are distinct from uh, the physical properties, but they are reducible to the physical properties. What does that mean? Well, if I have a mental property M, that is a distinct kind of property, distinct from my physical properties. I might have brain state P and mental state M, and those are two different kinds of properties. But my mental properties, my mental states, are reducible to my physical properties or my physical states. Make sense? It's like my mental state of being sleepy is a different kind of state than my brain state when I'm sleepy. But the only reason that coffee wakes me up is because it affects those physical states. So whether I'm sleepy or awake is ultimately reducible to what's going on in my brain and my nervous system. And then we also have reductive physicalism. This is type physicalism or identity theory. So non-reductive physicalism says that mental properties are distinct from, albeit reducible to, um, physical properties. But reductive physicalism says psychological properties or kinds of properties are reducible to physical properties. Um, Oh, I got this wrong. Irreducible on property dualism, reducible on property dualism, which means psychological processes and kinds are physical properties and kinds. There are only properties of one sort exemplified in this world, and they are physical properties. So mental states just are physical states. Let me try and illustrate it with another example. This one I think is due to Paul and Patricia Churchland. What is lightning? What is lightning? What causes lightning? You can answer in the chat or you can raise your hand. Friction in the air? Static electricity, a discharge of static electricity? Yeah. The friction in the air causes the buildup of static electricity. Would we say that this electricity causes lightning? Well, the Churchlands, who are famous identity theorists, would say no. Lightning doesn't cause electricity. Lightning is electricity. Yeah, like Leo says, we'd say the electricity is the lightning. Yeah. So we're identity theorists about lightning. Like electricity doesn't cause lightning. Electricity is lightning. Yeah, there are changes in electrical potential and that's what causes these discharges, right? When we have too much of a negative charge built up in the clouds, we get lightning going to the ground. You can also get a positive charge in the ground that wants to go up. Like when you see a volcano erupting, and sometimes you see lightning around the clouds of gas and dust of the erupting volcano, that's positively charged. It wants to go up. Um, But in any case, the charge doesn't cause the lightning. The lightning is the charge. The lightning is the electricity. Same here. The mental state just is the physical state and is reducible to the physical state. Non-reductive physicalism says no, there are distinct properties mental and physical, and the mental properties are not reducible to physical properties. So just to clarify, because I got a little mixed up there. Now, type physicalism is quite strong. Type physicalism implies that if I'm in pain, then I have the mental state of being in pain, and that's reducible to the brain state that realizes or instantiates being in pain. But that also implies, or type physicalism also implies that when you're in pain, you have the exact same type of brain state when you're in pain that I do. But that's not likely to be true because we each have different brains, right? Our brains are wired up a little bit differently. So a less strong formulation is non-reductive physicalism or token physicalism, where if I have a mental state of being in pain, sure, that's reducible to my having a token of a type of physical state or brain state. So my brain and your brain, when we're in pain, those physical states are a little bit different, but they're both examples or instantiations of a particular kind of physical state, like your C fibers firing or something. Does everybody understand that? If not, don't, I know I've already said don't be afraid to speak up, but we will revisit a lot of this as we make our way through the course. So if I'm saying stuff that sounds really like abstract and kind of hard to digest, don't panic because we will revisit it again and again. Yeah. What kinds of mental phenomena are there? Lots of different kinds. Question in the chat. Yeah, exactly. So type physicalism says that we all have the same type of brain state, realizing the same type of mental states. Token physicalism says we all have individual token physical states that realize those mental states. It's kind of like if I were to say, I think I used this example last time, right? If I say to you that I drive a Honda Civic, um, I don't have the same car as everyone else who drives a Honda Civic in the sense that we're all sharing the exact same car that exists here in this driveway and in that driveway. We all have different tokens of the same type of car. Like my Honda Civic is red, your Honda Civic is blue, et cetera, right? They're the same car in that they're the same type of car, but they're not the same car in the sense that the same car exists simultaneously in many different times and places. No, it's tokens of a type of car. So a token in philosophy, a token means like a specific instance of a type. Okay, so mental phenomena. What kinds of mental phenomena are there? Lots. Sensations. So these are mental events that are caused by the world affecting our sense organs and our nervous systems, right? Sensations can be simple, like right now I have an itch because I have a mosquito bite. That's a sensation. If I look at this coffee cup and have a visual impression of its color and shape, that's a sensation. What are some other sensations? We've been talking about one at length. That's pain. Pain is a sensation. Joshua asks, so the physical state would be like a general case, and the token physical state would be the specific case of exactly how your brain interprets the same overall physical. Not exactly. Are you guys familiar with the distinction between particulars and universals? Okay, so the color green is a universal, right? There are lots of green things. So green is a universal, but the individual green things are particulars. is kind of like that with tokens and types. And the reason why people tend to favor non-reductive physicalism or token physicalism is because our brains are not all identical, right? Our brains go through the developmental processes that they go through, and your brain is going to be wired up a little bit differently than my brain. There are also non-human animals with different brains, different physiologically speaking, different brains. A rat can experience pain and a human can experience pain, but we absolutely cannot have the same type of brain state because our brains are different, right? But we can each have instantiations of a type of brain state, namely the state of the brain that realizes pain. What are some other sensations? Hot, cold, right? Those are sensations. Feeling hungry. What else? Maybe feeling full. You feel hungry, that's one sensation. Then you eat, and then you feel full. That's another sensation. Thirst, absolutely. Itchy. Well, yes, exactly. That mosquito bite. It's really bothering me, actually. I keep reaching down to scratch it. Um, sensations are like, you know, um, a little bit more fundamental than perceptions. Right. If I look closely, I can see that this coffee mug says Tim Hortons and it's kind of like brown and sort of reddish and it has a label. And once I've identified the cup, that I have a perception of it. But before I can like identify it, categorize it, name it, I might have sensations of it. Like it's over there, it's kind of a graduated cylinder shape, it's got colors, it feels warm. So sensations are a little bit more fundamental than perceptions. But perceptions are also mental states, right? If I have a visual perception of this coffee cup, that's a mental state that I'm in or a mental process that I'm undergoing. And we call these subjective qualitative aspects of our sensations and perceptions qualia, which again, we discussed this briefly last time, but this the smell, the particular aroma that coffee has is a quale, right? This coffee is, kind of bitter, right? It's warm. It's bitter in terms of smell, but also in terms of taste. These are all qualia, right? The blueness of the sky during the daytime is a quale. The green and brown of the trees out there as I look in the backyard, those are qualia. What are some other qualia? Well, think of what it's like to experience hunger or thirst. There's something that it's like to be hungry or to be thirsty, but they don't feel the same, right? Or feeling heat from a fire versus feeling cold because you lack heat. There's something that it's like to feel warm and something that it's like to feel cold, but they're different. They feel different from one another, right? These are qualia. Some philosophers say that there are certain mental states that lack qualia. I'm not sure what to make of this, but in this chapter, Kim says, for example, that there's nothing that it's like to believe, to have a belief like that 2 + 2 = 4. There's nothing that it's like to have such a belief. I don't know if I agree with that. Because just imagine someone told you that 2 + 2 = 5. How does that feel? That feels like something, right? So I don't know what to make of that. I think that most mental states are qualia laden. Most conscious mental states are qualia laden. Um, but we'll get back to that later. There are also there are mental states that we attribute to other people, and they're linguistically formatted. So they're formatted in what we call propositions, which are statements about the world that have a truth value. A proposition is something like "it is raining." right? That's a statement about the world. And by the world, I don't just mean the planet Earth, I mean the entire world, the universe. So the statement, it is raining, is a proposition. It's about the world, and it could be true or false. Right now, it is true. It's not raining where I am. So if I look out the window and I see that it's raining, wait a minute, no, it's not raining. Okay, I had a false belief. Oops, it happens. But say it's raining, and I look outside, and I go, "Oh, it's raining." I form the belief that it is raining based on what I see. That's a propositional attitude, and we can format that linguistically by, saying something like, "Josh believes that it is raining." So I adopt the attitude of belief toward the proposition, "It is raining." So they're linguistically formatted. They come in the form of a proposition, and there's usually a that clause embedded in our descriptions of propositional attitudes. And propositional attitudes, sometimes you hear them called pro attitudes or p attitudes, include things like beliefs and desires. But really anything, any mental state that we can describe linguistically with an embedded that clause could be considered a propositional attitude. So let's come up with some examples. Let's do some beliefs, right? What are some other beliefs that we have? And these don't just have to be like very abstract belief, like I believe in human rights. Like, yeah, okay, yeah, but something more immediate, right? Like, I believe there's a coffee cup on the counter. That's a belief. What are some other beliefs? Yeah, I believe my computer is turned on currently. And it sounds like your belief is true since you're communicating with me over the internet via the computer, right? Exactly right. You might not be immediately aware of all your beliefs all the time. Oh, thanks, Liam. I believe I exist too. I'm glad. I don't want a bunch of solipsists in this course. That's not what I'm trying to do. Um, what else? What else? Yeah, some beliefs you might not be immediately aware of, right? Well, yeah, it could be, Hayden, it could be either way, right? We can describe our own beliefs or we can attribute beliefs to other people, right? Like, let's say my partner leaves the house and she takes her umbrella. Well, then I can then form the belief that she believes it's raining or that it's going to rain. So I can attribute a belief to her based on her behavior, right? But I can also introspect and ask about my own beliefs, like, you know, I'm trying to think of a mundane example. I mean, you might be uncertain whether you are a substance dualist or a physicalist, or you might be uncertain about your beliefs about the mental. So you might have to think about it to work out what you really believe, right? But yeah, it doesn't matter. It could be beliefs you have or beliefs that other people have. It could be beliefs about your beliefs, beliefs about other people's beliefs. As long as you can linguistically format it with an embedded that clause, it's probably a propositional attitude. And propositional attitudes, yeah, no problem. They don't just include beliefs, but of course, desires, right? Think about it. I'm thirsty. I believe there's sparkling water in the fridge. And I desire to satisfy my thirst. And I further believe that by getting up and going to the fridge and getting a sparkling water and drinking it, I will satisfy my thirst. So the beliefs are linguistically formatted with embedded that clauses. So are my desires. Like, I desire that, I desire not to be thirsty. And I believe there's something in the fridge that will do that. And those beliefs and desires interact to cause behavior. or produce behavior. We also say that these are intentional states because they have content. They're about something, right? What's my belief about? Um, that it's raining or that there is sparkling water in the fridge, right? What is my desire? That I'm not thirsty anymore, right? It's pretty straightforward. But of course, there are other mental states like moods and emotions. Um, these are kind of what Kim groups under the label feelings, but feelings might also include sensations. I mean, colloquially, when we talk about our emotions, we tend to use the word feelings, but philosophically, it's kind of an imprecise way of talking about things. If we wanted to be more precise, we could identify emotions and certain sensations, i.e., feelings, as somatic states, body states. Um, so moods are states that we feel, they're bodily states that we feel, as well as mental. They're long term, not, but they're not intentional. Moods don't really tend to be about anything. Emotions are episodic, and they do tend to be about something. And some feelings like hunger or pain are neither foods are neither foods. Hunger or pain, these feelings are neither moods nor emotions, right? They're just sensations. Like sometimes I teach a class on the emotions and I ask for an example of an emotion, and people actually do say pain. Pain is not an emotion, but it is a feeling, right? Intentions or volitions are also propositional attitudes, also mental states, right? I decided that I would have pizza for breakfast. I made that decision. I intended to have pizza for breakfast, and so I did, right? And we might speak of other mental phenomena. We could speak of character traits or personality traits. We could speak about intelligence. We could talk about talents that people have, habits that people get into, right? These are all mental phenomena, right? Well, they're all kinds of different mental phenomena. But what is it that makes them all mental? What is it that makes them all count as mental? Philosophers have sought a criterion for distinguishing what is mental from what is not mental for a long time now. They've searched for what we call the mark of the mental, right? And these are all different, you know, at least on this slide, these are all different epistemological criteria for knowing what has a mind and what doesn't. That's what epistemology is. It is epistemology means like theory of knowledge or study of knowledge. So anytime in philosophy you're doing any epistemology, it's got to do with how we come to know things. And importantly, how we know that we know. So what we're asking here is how do we know when we're dealing with something with a mind versus when we're not? Remember those aliens from They're Made Out of Meat? They're flabbergasted at the idea that these meat machines think. For them, meat doesn't think, except here we are, made out of meat, obviously thinking, right? What was the mark of the mental for these aliens? Well, apparently, one thing that it wasn't was being made out of meat. Um, so, what should our mark of the mental be? Could it be an epistemological criterion like direct or immediate knowledge? You know, let's say I have a toothache or I see a red circle. I don't need to draw some kind of inference that I have a toothache or that I'm perceiving a red circle. I just feel the toothache. I just see the circle. It's direct and immediate, right? If you turned the lights off and all of a sudden it's dark in this room, I don't need to infer like, hmm, according to my calculations, it is now dark in this room. No, I just know it's dark, right? Maybe that's one mark of the mental. Another might be the fact that you have this sort of first person privilege, or that your mental states are private. There's a sort of mindness to your experiences, and there's a mindness to my experiences, a sort of subjectivity. That could be a mark of the mental. Or maybe infallibility and transparency. My knowledge of my mental states, Kim argues, is infallible and incorrigible. I cannot be wrong about my mental states, and my mind cannot be changed about my mental states with respect to the fact that they're mine, right? I can be wrong. I can be wrong about certain things, right? I can have false beliefs and I can have misperceptions, but I cannot be wrong about whose beliefs and perceptions those are. Do you see what I mean? Um, Another one is the idea that my mental states are transparent to me. I actually disagree with Kim here. Sure, it certainly seems that way a lot of the time, but no, we actually have quite limited introspective access, um, to our own minds. I mean, Freud catches a lot of flack these days, but one thing that he was right about was that the unconscious is doing a lot more um, outside of our direct awareness than we think. Of course, he was wrong about a lot of the details, but maybe the mental is non-spatial. All right, this is very Cartesian. Descartes thought that the mind was a thinking thing. The body was made of material substance or res extensa, extended substance. Um, Res extensa has mass and takes up space, but is non-mental. Res cogitans is mental, but is non-physical. It doesn't take up space. So maybe the mental is non-spatial. But if you take this seriously, then you might be a substance dualist. And very few philosophers are substance dualists today. We'll see why next time. But the basic idea is that substance dualism raises more problems than it solves. That's the basic idea. One big candidate for a mark of the mental is intentionality. This is known as Brentano's thesis because it's due to the Austrian philosopher Franz Brentano. Um, Mental states are intentional. They're about something. So another way of putting this is to say that mental states have content. So, if I believe that there is pizza in the fridge, or if I have a desire that I should eat pizza, the content of my belief and my desire is pizza in the fridge. That's what my belief and my desire are about, pizza. And a lot of thinkers throughout the years, uh, following Brentano, have agreed that, yeah, this might be a pretty good candidate for a mark of the mental, a criterion for distinguishing between things that have minds and things that don't. This is how Kim puts it. Or no, this is how Brentano puts it, quoted in Kim. Every mental phenomenon is characterized by what the scholastics of the Middle Ages called the intentional, or the mental inexistence of an object. And what we might call, though not wholly unambiguously, reference to a content, direction toward an object, which is not to be understood here as meaning a thing, or immanent objectivity. Every mental phenomenon includes something as object within itself, although they do not all do so in the same way. In presentation, something is presented. In judgment, something is affirmed or denied. In love, loved. In hate, hated. In desire, desired, and so on. So our thoughts have objects, but they're not the objects out there in the world. They're mental objects. And that's what the thoughts are about. So that's Brentano's thesis. That's intentionality. And we can talk about two different kinds of intentionality as well, referential intentionality and content intentionality. Referential intentionality deals with what our mental states refer to, right? Kind of like how words refer, right? Mental states are directed towards objects or states of affairs in the world. That's referential intentionality. Content intentionality is what we've been talking about mostly up till now. The content of our propositional attitudes, for example. So the content of beliefs, content of desires, even the content of emotions. That's content intentionality, right? That's the aboutness as opposed to the directionality. So there's referential intentionality and content intentionality. Um, Here's a little fun exercise I like to do. Who's familiar with this painting by Rene Magritte? It's called The Treachery of Images. Who's seen this before? Lee has. Anyone else? Yeah, it's a familiar enough painting, right? Anybody read French? What does this say? If you read French, Lee, what's this say?
It says this is not a pipe
That's right.
because Magritte was saying it's actually a painting of a pipe.
Hmm. That's right. A painting of a pipe, or a representation of a pipe, if you like. In this case, it's painted, but paintings are types of representations. So that's what it means. For a long time, I was like, what do you mean it's not a pipe? It's clearly a pipe. And then I realized, no, it's not a pipe at all. It's merely a representation of a pipe. And the fact that our mental states have content means that they are also representational, rather like Magritte's painting. So all of our mental states, our thoughts, perceptions, everything, these are kinds of mental representations. So if you think of a pipe, that also is not a pipe. It is a representation of a pipe. And these mental representations are what supply the content for our mental states. That's what makes those mental states about something. And mental representations also have justification and correctness conditions. We can have false beliefs. We can have false perceptions, right? We could misrepresent the world, or we could represent them correctly, but with poor justification. I mean, just real quick, who's done some epistemology before? And who can tell us about justification and correctness conditions? I keep switching to Descartes. Anybody? Justification and correctness? Let's start with correctness. Oh my goodness, what is happening? Oh, that's not a bad guess. That's more about ethics rather than epistemology. Yeah, William K. Clifford's ship. It's always wrong to believe anything without evidence, right? That's what Clifford was trying to show. I thought of William K. Clifford when the Titan submarine imploded. Yeah, he did. He believed. Oh, okay. I see where you're going with this. Yeah. So even if the ship made it, he might have had a correct belief, but it was poorly justified. Yeah. And in the case of the Titan submarine, they just had a false belief that the sub was safe. It wasn't. Um, so justification and correctness conditions. So mental representations have justification and correctness conditions. There are certain conditions that need to be met for your mental state to be correct, and you also need some justification, at least when it comes to beliefs. So if I believe that it is raining, my belief is correct if and only if it is actually raining. And my belief is justified if and only if I have some good reason for believing it's raining. And that could be as simple as opening my eyes and looking and seeing that it is raining or hearing the rain on the roof, right? So correctness is whether your beliefs are true, your mental states are accurately representing the world, and the justification conditions have to do with the basis um, for which you have that mental state, right? But you can have false beliefs, and you can have misperceptions, right? Yeah, like I might hear a sound. Yeah, like I could correctly guess it is raining. Um, and it might be raining, but if my justification is that I hear rain coming from, the somewhere where somebody has the television on and it's raining in the movie, it could be raining outside, and I could form the belief that it's raining. And I would be correct. But I wouldn't be very well justified because my evidence is not connected to the world in the right way. The evidence doesn't connect my belief to the world in the right way. I saw a funny tweet once. Um, some philosophy professor had tweeted something like, I'm going to lecture in my office, but with a background that's just a photograph of my office, so that students will think I'm in my office, but they'll have like a poorly justified true belief. This is what we call a Gettier case, basically. But yeah, like imagine if I told you I'm lecturing from my office and I really am in my office, and your justification for forming that belief was that it looks like it's my office, and I really am in my office, but it's actually just a green screen displaying my office. You would have a true belief, but it's not well justified. So, questions to keep in mind. What is it that all of these mental phenomena have in common that unites them as mental phenomena? Is it intentionality? Is it non-spatiality? Some of the epistemic criteria we covered, like direct, immediate access? Um, or is it something else, like consciousness? If consciousness is the mark of the mental, then a lot of things that we think are mental might not be mental. Maybe mentality is representational in character, which means that computers think just as we do. We'll keep coming back to these questions as we go. We'll have a lot of opportunity to discuss them. Are there any questions about anything I've covered today? Because I do have one little thing I'd like to show you before we go. Any questions at all? All right, well, for next time, we're going to talk more about substance dualism. You're going to want to make sure you read Kim chapter 2, Mind as Immaterial Substance. And you're also going to want to read the first two meditations by Rene Descartes. They're a pretty easy read. Dare I say, fun. They're a fun read, actually. I always like reading Descartes, even though I disagree with him on so much. He is a very good writer. And he's a lot of fun to read. So I think if you read the first two of his meditations from Meditations on First Philosophy, that's the primary source. Kim is a secondary, tertiary source. So definitely read those meditations. That's what we'll be doing next time. I want to show you one more thing. It's the template for your first reflection assignment. And it contains some instructions. So you go down to the helpful materials section here, scroll down to assignment templates, and you will see reflection assignment 1. And you can download that, open it up. I'm just going to briefly go over these instructions with you. So we open it. You can enable editing. So yeah, it's a template basically. So see, it says student name, student number. Delete that, put your name there, put your student number, put the assignment due date. I forget when exactly it is. I think it's the 16th or something. The The supplementary readings are on Brightspace. Everything else is in the textbook. So anything from Kim is in his book. Anything else, I've put it on Brightspace. Yeah, so download this template. Look at the top here, it says your name here. Put your name there. Okay. Keep this all the same in case I have to download something. It helps me keep it organized. Put your name and student number and the due date here. Give it a little catchy subtitle. Don't just hand in reflection assignment one. You can give it a subtitle if you want. And basically, there are two parts to this. In the first part, you want to tell me why you're here. Why are you interested in this, right? I'll read you the instructions. Tell me why you were interested in philosophy of mind. You should try to avoid explanations like, I need this credit to graduate. Don't just be like, I'm here because I need the credit, man. No. Instead, tell me what it is about the mind that interests you. Perhaps you're a psychology, neuroscience, or cognitive science student who wants to learn more about philosophy of mind. Perhaps you come from a different academic background and you are just very interested in the nature of the mental. Perhaps you're interested in the mental started with another course you took at university, or an experience you've had, or a book you've read, or a film you've enjoyed, or something else. Perhaps you have always been fascinated by the mind. Perhaps you are interested in a specific aspect of the mental, like reason, agency, free will, perception, or the mysteries of consciousness. Whatever the case, explain to me why you are here to learn more about the philosophy of mind. And you should aim for about 250 to 300 words, although you can go beyond that word limit. Don't go under the word limit. You can go way over it. I don't care. Don't go under it. All right? So that's what you're going to do in part two, and then in part one, and then in part two, now that you've explained why you're here, tell me about what you're hoping to learn. So, which aspect of the philosophy of mind are you most excited to learn about? Is there a particular thinker whose work you are curious about? Is there a particular question about the nature of the mental that you hope this course will help you to answer? Is there a particular theory that you want to learn more about? Whatever the case, tell me what it is you're hoping to learn more about, as well as why you wish to learn more about this aspect of the mental. And again, aim for 250 to 350 words. You can go over 350 words. Do not go under 250 words. If you use any references, you should put them here. And delete these, like after you write your part, delete this, highlight it, delete it, remove the italics, right? And single space it too, actually, now that I'm thinking of that, or double space it. Easier on the eyes, especially when we're staring at a computer screen, right? So please double space. If you don't remember to do that, it's not a big deal, but my poor little eyeballs will thank you if you remember to double space. Delete all the instructions after you've written what you need to write. Put your references here. Do not use bullet points. They need to be formatted properly. I recommend you use APA. As I said last time, you can use whatever one you want, whatever citation style you want, but keep it consistent. Use the guides on Purdue University's Online Writing Lab, or OWL, which again, you can find a link to that in the helpful materials module here. See? Right here. There it is. You get your APA guide, your MLA guide, whatever guide you need. You should at the very least be using Kim's book as a reference. And if you're referring to anything else, like any thinker, a book, a film, whatever, put that source there. Make sure you delete all these instructions before you submit. Make sure to save copies of your work as you go. These are your drafts. You're going to submit, I'm going to say 3 drafts along with your final draft. And your drafts have to clearly show the progress you've made. I can't just have like rough notes and then the finished product. I need to see that you did the work. So failure to submit proof of work results in a 0. Failure to, even if you submit proof of work and that does not adequately show your progress, that also gets you a 0. We will leave comments on your work and we will reach out to ask for your proof of work, but you won't get a grade unless you submit satisfactory proof of work. Try to focus on storytelling a bit, because this is a bit like this is why I'm here, and this is what I'm hoping to learn, and this is why I'm hoping to learn it, right? So engage in a bit of storytelling, give it a bit of a narrative spin. That would be nice. And absolutely make sure you're employing some of what we've learned so far, right? The terms, theories, and concepts that we're picking up as we go. I don't expect you to be experts, because, of course, we've just started the course, but, you know, try and use the language, the terminology, the ideas that we're exploring here and that we will explore as you put this together. Um, where'd that go? There it is, the chat, the question in the chat. Should we take screenshots of our work? No, save drafts. Draft one, draft two, draft three, final draft. And then submit those. Um, get out of here, Grammarly. I don't want Grammarly. Yeah, a big part of the reason why we're doing it this way is because generative AI has just made teaching kind of a pain in the butt in certain respects, right? And it's not that I don't trust people to do the right thing. A lot of you will not use generative AI, but I've just had so many students using generative AI. It's not a majority, but it's enough that it's a problem. So that's why I require proof of work. And yeah, like you'll even get comments. You'll get feedback comments and everything if you submit your paper, but you won't get a mark unless you submit proof of work that shows that that you did the work yourself. Okay, we're running out of time. We've only got 1 minute left, but definitely take a look at this sort of like grade breakdown here, because this describes what gets you which grade. Um, yeah, Holly, I'm not surprised. Um, I notice a lot of my students are afraid to use M dashes because they're afraid that I would identify that as written by generative AI. It depends on the context. If you're writing an answer to a quiz question on Brightspace and I see M dashes, I know it's AI because Brightspace is not enabled for M dashes. So I know you've just copied and pasted that in there. But if you're doing it in something like this, then yeah, sure. I expect you to use M dashes, right? Yes, yes, my blah, blah, blah. Lee's beloved is M dashes. Some people misuse them. But even if you use them wrong, then okay, now I know AI didn't write it because you screwed it up. Same with semicolons. I try to tell people to really watch how they use semicolons because most people don't know what they're doing. But at least if you screw it up, I know you did it and not a computer. So, don't worry about it. But yeah, or maybe if I see somebody using the word delve, because there was this study that showed that generative AI uses the word delve much, much more than humans actually use that word. Yeah, deeply. We're going to deeply delve into the question M dash, not an insignificant question, M dash, about what is the mental, right? Don't worry. I kind of I've got a pretty good handle on this. And, proof of work aside, like my whole area of expertise is um, the intersection between AI, philosophy of mind, and cognitive science. I'm the last person you want to try and use generative AI to cheat with. Um, so don't. But take a look at this, okay? An F, you get an F, it's incomplete or massively fails to meet the objectives of the assignment. A D, falls short of the word limit. Maybe there's some unnecessary repetition, bad arguments. You can read about it here. But it largely fails, but there's maybe some redeeming qualities. C is satisfactory. B is good. A is excellent. If you want an A plus, you have to do an excellent job and impress me. So we're out of time. We're actually 2 minutes over the end of class, but do take a look at this. This is your rubric. This is your breakdown. This describes, how a paper where the paper will be, or what am I trying to say? This will let you know what each sort of, whether it's a D, C, B, or A, what it's doing right and what it's doing wrong. It's all contained here. And of course, if you have any questions, talk to me. I do think you should start working on these now, even though they're not due for a little bit. I would get started soon. That way, if you run into any questions, you can reach out and contact me. That is it for today. I hope you all enjoyed the lesson. I hope I didn't confuse you too much. If you are confused, don't worry. We're just sort of dipping our toes in and surveying the whole field. Things will start sticking much better as we look through, each of the issues we've mentioned today, sort of one at a time, chapter by chapter. So thanks, everybody. I'll see you all on Wednesday for dualism. All right. Have a good rest of your day. Bye for now.